Imagine you spent years doing everything right, saving every dollar for your first condo in Toronto or Vancouver. You finally buy in, believing real estate in Canada only goes up. But today, your unit is worth less than you paid. Fees are rising, buyers have disappeared, and what once felt like a smart investment is quietly turning into a financial trap. Before you buy an apartment in Canada, you need to see what is really happening. Imagine you are a first-time buyer in Canada who did everything the financial advice columns told you to do. You skipped the vacations. You drove the same car for 8 years. You watched your colleagues upgrade their wardrobes and book international trips while you quietly transferred every spare dollar into a savings account with one single purpose: a down payment on a piece of Canadian real estate, a condo in Toronto, a unit in Vancouver, something that was finally, officially yours. A foothold in the market everyone kept telling you only goes up. The day arrives. You walk into the sales center. The agent is polished and confident, armed with charts showing 10 years of uninterrupted price growth. Canada's population is rising faster than at any point in the country's history. Immigration is at record levels. Supply is critically constrained. Demand never stops. You look at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the quartz countertops, the rooftop terrace with the skyline behind it, and you sign the contract. You hand over your $90,000 deposit. You feel, for the first time in years, genuinely ahead. Fast forward to today. The unit you bought for $680,000 is being listed by your neighbor for $589,000, and it has been sitting on the market for 4 months with no offers. Your condo fees have climbed from $520 a month to $840 a month in 3 years. A letter arrived last week from the Condo Corporation demanding a special assessment payment of $18,000 within 90 days to repair failing waterproofing in the underground parking structure. And when you called your mortgage broker to discuss refinancing options, they told you the numbers no longer work in your favor. You are not building wealth inside this unit. You are slowly bleeding out inside a concrete box that the market has quietly decided it no longer wants at the price you paid. This is not an isolated story. It is the documented reality of the Canadian condo market in 2024 and 2025, playing out in towers across Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Ottawa for thousands of owners who bought at the peak of a cycle they were told had no ceiling. To understand why Canada's condo market is in genuine structural trouble, you have to start with the most fundamental question in real estate. Can the people who are supposed to buy these units actually afford them? The data says no, and it has been saying no for long enough that the answer is no longer a warning about the future. It is a description of what is already happening. According to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or CMHC, the benchmark price of a condo apartment in Toronto was sitting above $683,000 in early 2024. In Vancouver, it was worse, hovering above $760,000 for a standard unit. Now look at what Statistics Canada tells us about the people who live and work in those cities. The median household income in Toronto is approximately $84,000 per year. That means the average Toronto condo costs more than 8 times the median annual household income of the city's own residents. 8 times. Housing economists and international bodies, including the World Bank, treat a price-to-income ratio above 5 as the formal threshold for severe unaffordability. Canada's 2 largest condo markets have been sitting at nearly double that threshold for years, and for a sustained period, one mechanism kept the entire structure from collapsing under its own weight. Near-zero interest rates made the unaffordable appear survivable. When the Bank of Canada held its policy interest rate near zero between 2020 and 2022, buyers could absorb those enormous price tags because the cost of borrowing was almost negligible. A $650,000 mortgage at 1.8% is painful but mathematically manageable for a household with 2 incomes and disciplined spending. The same mortgage at 5.5% is a fundamentally different financial reality, higher monthly payments, a harder qualifying test, and a significantly smaller pool of households that can pass it. Between March 2022 and July 2023, the Bank of Canada executed one of the most aggressive monetary tightening cycles in its modern institutional history, raising the overnight rate 10 consecutive times from 0.25% to 5%. The monthly carrying cost on that same $650,000 Toronto condo jumped by approximately $1,500 in the space of 16 months. Buyers who had received pre-approval letters at low rates found those letters no longer reflected what they could actually borrow. An entire segment of demand vanished from the condo market almost overnight. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board documented the result clearly. Condo sales across the Greater Toronto Area dropped sharply through 2023 and into 2024. Active condo inventory climbed to levels not seen in over a decade. Prices that the industry had spent years insisting were permanently supported by immigration-driven demand, and structural supply shortage began sliding, not in a dramatic headline collapse, but in the slow, steady, barely perceptible way that a slow puncture deflates a tire. You barely notice until you are standing on the rim. Royal LePage and the Canadian Real Estate Association both published data through 2024, confirming that condo price growth was significantly lagging detached housing in major markets, with some downtown Toronto condo segments recording outright year-over-year price declines for the first time in many investors' holding periods. Here is where the government enters the story, and where the situation becomes significantly more complicated than the real estate industry's rates will come down and everything will recover narrative acknowledges. The Bank of Canada has begun cutting its policy rate from the 2023 peak. The argument being made by real estate agents, developers, and market commentators across Canada is that lower rates will restore buyer confidence, bring sideline demand back into the market, and stabilize condo prices. This argument contains a partial truth embedded in a significant omission. What it omits is Canada's mortgage stress test, and why the stress test has structurally and permanently altered the pool of Canadians who can qualify to purchase a condo at current prices, regardless of where the Bank of Canada's overnight rate settles. Introduced by the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, OSFI, and tightened in 2018, the stress test requires every single mortgage borrower in Canada, regardless of the size of their down payment, regardless of the lender they use, to demonstrate that they can afford their loan payments at whichever rate is higher, their actual contracted rate plus 2 percentage points, or a floor rate of 5.25%. No exceptions, no exemptions based on down payment size or credit quality. When rates were at 1.5%, the stress test qualifying rate was 3.5%, demanding but navigable for many households. When rates sit at 4.5% following rate cuts, the stress test qualifying rate rises to 6.5%. At a 6.5% qualifying rate applied to a $680,000 Toronto condo with a standard down payment, the number of Canadian households that can pass the test and secure financing is dramatically smaller than it was during the low-rate era that inflated prices to current levels. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, acknowledged in its 2024 Housing Market Outlook that affordability across Canada's major urban centres remains critically stretched with no rapid return to the conditions that characterized the 2020 and 2021 boom. The stress test was introduced as a consumer protection measure. It is a legitimate and well-intentioned policy, but in a market where prices never corrected to align with stress-tested borrowing capacity, it functions simultaneously as a permanent ceiling on demand at current price levels. The combination of elevated prices, a structurally reduced buyer pool, and rising holding costs has produced a market where sellers and buyers cannot find each other at prices that work for both parties. The result is not a crash, it is a stalemate, with growing inventory, extended days on market, and price reductions that are happening quietly, building by building, unit by unit, without triggering the kind of dramatic headline event that would force a public conversation about what has happened to the Canadian condo as a financial asset. The story of how Canada's condo market arrived at this stalemate cannot be told without understanding the economic engine that was quietly driving it for the past 15 years, and what happened when that engine seized. Canada's pre-construction condo market was not primarily a market for people who wanted to live in the units being sold. It was a market for investors, small private landlords who would purchase a unit off the plan, Pay deposit installments during the construction period, take possession on completion, rent the unit to a tenant, and wait for the asset to appreciate while the tenant's rent partially offset the carrying costs. Research from Urbanation, a Toronto-based real estate analytics firm that tracks new condo development across the Greater Toronto Area, found that investors owned between 40 and 50% of all new condo units built there in recent years. In some specific downtown towers, the investor ownership share was significantly higher. The entire model rested on one prerequisite: that rental income from the unit would at least partially cover the monthly cost of owning it. Not necessarily fully. Many investors accepted modest negative cash flow in exchange for anticipated capital appreciation. But the gap between rent and carrying costs had to be manageable. That prerequisite no longer exists in Toronto or Vancouver at current prices and current rates. Run the numbers on a standard new 600 square foot condo in downtown Toronto in 2024. Purchase price $650,000. 20% down payment of $130,000. Mortgage on the remaining $520,000 at current rates. Add condo fees averaging $650 per month. Add monthly property tax allocation. Your total monthly carrying cost, mortgage, fees, and taxes combined lands between $3,800 and $4,200 per month, depending on your exact rate and fee structure. According to Urbanation and Rentals.ca rental market data from 2024, the average achievable rent for that same unit in downtown Toronto is approximately $2,400 per month. The monthly cash shortfall is $1,400 to $1,800 every single month on a single investment property, before maintenance, vacancy, or unexpected repairs. When the investor economics deteriorate this severely, investors do not gradually reduce their activity, they stop. And when the investor class that represented 40 to 50% of pre-construction condo purchasing withdraws from the market, the developers who rely on pre-sales to secure construction financing face an immediate and serious problem: pre-sales fund construction. Without pre-sales at viable prices, construction cannot proceed. Stories, the Canadian real estate industry publication, reported that new condo project cancellations in Ontario reached multi-year highs through 2023 and 2024. Developers walked away from projects that had already been sold to buyers, leaving depositors in the difficult position of recovering their money through legal processes that move slowly and do not guarantee full recovery with interest. These cancellations are not just a developer problem, they are a crisis for the thousands of Canadians who handed over deposit checks for homes that will now never be built. The risks facing Canadian condo owners are not limited to price depreciation and market illiquidity. There is a second financial threat that does not arrive with a market crash and does not show up in price data. It usually arrives in an envelope in your mailbox when you are least financially prepared. This is the hidden cost. When you purchase a condo in Canada, you automatically become a member of the Condominium Corporation, the legal entity responsible for managing and maintaining the building's shared infrastructure, common areas, mechanical systems, structural elements, and exterior envelope. Every month you pay condo fees, which are structured to fund two separate categories of expenditure: current operating costs, such as the building manager, cleaning, utilities for common areas, insurance, and routine maintenance. The Reserve Fund, a savings account set aside for major capital repairs the building will require over its lifetime. The Reserve Fund is where the hidden crisis in Canadian condo buildings lives, and it has been building quietly for years. Provincial condo legislation in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta requires every condominium corporation to commission a Reserve Fund study, a professional engineering assessment of the building's projected capital repair requirements over a 30-year horizon, and whether the current level of monthly contributions is sufficient to meet those requirements. The uncomfortable documented reality, acknowledged by provincial auditors and consumer advocacy organizations in multiple provinces, is that a significant number of Canadian condo buildings are operating with chronically underfunded reserve accounts. The mechanism that created this underfunding is straightforward and deliberate. During the pre-construction sales phase, developers often market units with artificially low monthly condo fees to make the projected carrying cost look more attractive to buyers. A building advertised at $350 per month in fees wins buyers over a competing building at $600 per month in fees, even if the lower fee is structurally insufficient to fund the reserve account at the level the building's engineering requirements demand. The reserve fund is established at the minimum level required by provincial legislation. Contributions are kept low during the initial years of the building's life, and the funding gap is deferred into the future onto the balance sheets of the people who purchase the units. When the underground parking membrane fails after 15 years and water begins destroying the structural concrete supporting the tower, the reserve fund frequently does not have sufficient balance to pay for the repair. When the building's elevator systems require complete replacement, or when the exterior cladding is found to have failed and the building envelope requires full remediation, that reserve fund gap becomes a financial emergency. The Condominium Corporation has one legal remedy available to it under provincial condo legislation: the special assessment. A special assessment is a mandatory one-time payment levied against every unit owner in proportion to their ownership share. There is no right of refusal. There is no statutory right to an extended payment plan unless the board of directors voluntarily chooses to offer one. You pay the amount demanded within the time frame specified, or the corporation registers a lien against your unit's certificate of title and pursues recovery through the courts, including in the most serious cases forced sale of the unit to satisfy the debt. Special assessments of $15,000, $30,000, and in some documented cases $60,000 or more per unit are not hypothetical worst-case scenarios. These are real, documented outcomes that have left owners financially devastated. They are documented, reported cases from buildings in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver that have been covered in local media and confirmed in condominium tribunal decisions across multiple provinces. The defining characteristic of the special assessment crisis is that buyers have almost no reliable mechanism for predicting whether the building they are purchasing is adequately reserved or sitting on a multi-million-dollar repair liability that will be distributed across unit owners within the next 3 to 5 years unless they know precisely what to look for in the reserve fund study and read it before signing any offer. Federal and provincial governments across Canada have introduced a succession of policy measures over the past several years aimed at addressing housing affordability, cooling speculative demand, and protecting Canadian buyers from foreign competition for residential property. Several of these measures have introduced new distortions into the condo market without meaningfully resolving the underlying structural problems that created the affordability crisis. The federal foreign buyer ban, which came into force in January 2023 under the Prohibition on the Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act, prohibits most non-residents from purchasing residential real estate in Canada for a defined period. Ontario enforces a non-resident speculation tax, the NRST, on foreign national purchasers of residential property. British Columbia applies an additional property transfer tax to foreign buyers and operates a speculation and vacancy tax designed to discourage properties being held empty. The stated policy intention behind these measures was to reduce speculative foreign demand and redirect housing supply toward Canadian residents and citizens. The practical effect on the condo market has proven more complicated than the policy design anticipated. Foreign buyer activity in Canadian residential real estate, while real and in some specific market segments significant, was never the primary structural force driving condo prices in Toronto and Vancouver to levels 8 times median household income. Domestic investor activity, domestic speculative purchasing driven by near-zero interest rates, a decade of supply failure in major urban centers, and the structural dependence of the pre-construction condo market on investor capital were far more consequential forces. Removing one category of buyer, foreign purchasers, from a market that was simultaneously losing its domestic investor base did not stabilize the market. It removed one source of demand from a market that was already running critically short of qualified buyers at current prices. The mortgage insurance program of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, which backs mortgages with down payments of less than 20% and is explicitly designed to help first-time buyers access homeownership, has simultaneously functioned as an inadvertent constraint in Canada's most expensive markets. CMHC insured mortgages are subject to a maximum eligible purchase price of $1 million. In Toronto and Vancouver, where benchmark condo prices routinely approach or breach that threshold, the program designed to open homeownership to first-time buyers is structurally unavailable to those buyers for the most common product type in the cities where they live and work. The insurance program built to lower the barrier to entry is calibrated for a price environment that existed a decade ago and no longer reflects the market it was designed to serve. The combined effect of the stress test, the foreign buyer measures, the investor exodus, the reserve fund crisis, and the CMHC insurance cap is a condo market that is simultaneously unaffordable for the buyers who need it most, unattractive to the investors who previously sustained its supply pipeline, and increasingly financially precarious for the existing owners who are watching fees rise, special assessments arrive, and sale prices slide below what they paid. The Canadian condo market is not universally worthless. That framing is deliberately provocative, and the reality is more precise. Specific segments of the market, particularly new pre-construction condos in Toronto and Vancouver purchased at peak prices between 2021 and 2023, are facing a genuine and sustained liquidity crisis. The crisis is driven by the collision of unaffordable prices, a collapsed investor base, rising condo fees, and a stress test that has permanently reduced the qualified buyer pool. That is not a temporary dip. It is a fundamental repricing of risk that will not be resolved by a rate cut cycle alone. Read the reserve fund study before making any offer, not the summary page the listing agent provides. Read the full engineering report. You are looking for the percentage funded figure, the ratio of the current reserve fund balance to the amount the engineering assessment says the fund should hold. Anything below 70% funded is a warning that warrants further investigation. Below 50% means the building is operating with almost no financial cushion, and a special assessment is a matter of timing rather than probability. If the strata report references ongoing litigation against a developer or contractor, walk away, because active litigation against a builder makes it significantly harder to obtain mortgage financing on units in the building. Calculate the true all-in monthly cost before committing to a purchase. Take the purchase price, apply the current stress test qualifying rate to determine your actual mortgage payment, add the actual monthly condo fee from the current strata documents rather than the developer's projected figure, add property tax, and compare the total monthly number against the realistic rental income achievable for that unit in that building in the current market. If the gap between ownership cost and rental income exceeds $800 per month, you are not acquiring a cash-flowing investment. You are accepting a monthly liability with a concrete address and a condo board attached to it. If you are already a condo owner in a building with reserve fund concerns, act within the owner's corporation rather than waiting passively. Attend annual general meetings, request the most recent reserve fund study, ask the board directly what the funding percentage is and what their plan is for closing the gap. Owners who engage early with reserve fund deficiencies have the ability to advocate for gradual fee increases that are far less painful than the emergency special assessment that arrives when the gap has been ignored for too long. The Canadian condo market requires informed, patient, and well-advised buyers who understand what they are purchasing. Not just the unit, but the financial health of the corporation that owns the building it sits in. Until reserve fund disclosure is standardized and mandatory at the point of marketing rather than buried in documents most buyers never read, and until pre-construction deposit protections are genuinely enforced in cases of project cancellation, the risk of buying into the wrong building at the wrong price is borne entirely by the buyer. If you found this interesting, check out this video.